So the first Kingdom Hearts was an unbelievable success, and both gamers and critics enjoyed the hell out of it. Granted, as I said in my review, it's aged quite a bit since 2002, but it can still be fun to play. People wanted to see where the story continued after the first game, but while fans were waiting for a second game, there was another title released in 2004 for the Game Boy Advance of all systems called Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. Since it was on an inferior console and had no number next to it, everybody assumed that it was a spin-off title that could be easily ignored, especially since it revolved around card-based combat as opposed to hacking and slashing. But then when the actual Kingdom Hearts 2 came out, nobody could understand what was going on because Chain of Memories had highly important plot points that carried on to the next game. Only the people who actually played Chain of Memories would have gotten the gist of Kingdom Hearts 2's story, but we'll get more into that next time.
I don't blame anybody for thinking that this was a spin-off title. That was very misleading on Square's part, and all they had to do was call it Kingdom Hearts 2 Chain of Memories while calling Kingdom Hearts 2 Kingdom Hearts 3. But even then, I don't think they should have put this on a handheld. That wasn't fair to players who loved the first game but couldn't afford a Game Boy Advance and a copy of Chain of Memories. And trust me, this won't be the only time Square pulls this kind of crap for the Kingdom Hearts franchise.
Luckily, in 2008, 2 years after Kingdom Hearts 2 came out, we got a PS2 remake called Re-Chain of Memories, so now you don't have to get a new console to understand Kingdom Hearts 2, and it's this version that's included in all of the HD compilations. I'll also be mainly using this version to talk about the game since it's the most relevant option out there, but I will quickly glance at the Game Boy Advance release as well, because frankly, even my patience has its limits. In the last game, Ansem was defeated and Riku and King Mickey sealed Kingdom Hearts, the source of all light, with Destiny Islands being rebuilt, and Sora, Donald, and Goofy continue their search for their friends. Dusk breaks and Sora is greeted by a man in a black hooded coat who points the gang in the direction of Castle Oblivion. But he proceeds to tell them that as soon as they enter the castle, they've forgotten everything that happened in Kingdom Hearts 1, including all of the abilities that we grinded so many hours for. And I remember being way more pissed off about that during my first playthrough than I am now. The hooded figure then explains that the more Sora, Donald, and Goofy trudge through the castle, the more memories they lose, but will also gain new memories in the process. Sora is then given a deck of cards that hold his memories, including his friends and the places he's visited. Determined to figure out just what the hell's going on here, Sora revisits these areas and has to reintroduce himself to the Disney and Final Fantasy characters. It's basically just an excuse to go through Kingdom Hearts 1 again, but I'll get further into that later. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, it turns out there are more people dressed in black coats, either that or it's a secret goth club, who call themselves the Organization. We won't learn more about them until Kingdom Hearts 2, so for now all we need to know is that they've been keeping this mysterious girl named Naminé captive, guarded by Larxene, who I swear only nourishes everyone's misery, and Axel, the cocky, spiky redhead who's voiced by Quentin Flynn, also known as Raiden from the Metal Gear games. That's not all though. As Sora gets higher and higher, he starts to remember Naminé as a close childhood friend, probably closer than Kairi. So now Sora has an even bigger reason to get to the top, but out of nowhere, Riku arrives and wants to save Naminé too. And because he's still wants his dick to be bigger than Sora's, he's hell-bent on stopping him even though they're trying to reach the same goal. Naturally, to both Sora and the players, we're thinking, why are we going through this teen drama shit again? But to be fair, this is fully explained this time, as this Riku is actually later revealed to be a replica created by Vexen, another Organization member. However, we don't find that out until pretty late in the game when Larxene appears and Naminé's let out by Axel, who's really a double agent working against the Organization. Naminé turns out to be the one who manipulated the memories of Sora and the gang and was never a part of his life to begin with. She was forced to do this by the ruler of the castle, who's this fabulously pink-haired pretty boy named Marluxia, and he's also the one who brought us to Castle Oblivion in the first place. Marluxia threatened Naminé that if he didn't alter Sora's memories, he would make her scramble his brain so that he becomes a mindless puppet. But that seems to be Marluxia's ultimate goal anyway, on top of overthrowing the Organization with Larxene, so there wasn't much point to it. The poor kid's already got enough going on in this game, now we've got to add slavery to the mix? It's a miracle Sora doesn't just give up on everything, but he still manages to essentially kill the Organization member standing in his way, making it to the top of the castle and defeats Marluxia in their final battle. Naminé, feeling guilty about messing everything up, suggests that Sora, Donald, and Goofy get put into these machines for a whole year to help regain the memories that they lost, but this means that they'll forget everything that's happened in Castle Oblivion, including Naminé. Sora's pretty hesitant at first, but they eventually come up with an idea to write a note in Jiminy Cricket's journal to thank Naminé. Oh yeah, he was a thing in the original game and later entries I just completely forgot to talk about him last time. Through the power of Pinky Swears, Sora and Namine promise that they'll meet again before the pod closes, leaving Sora, Donald, and Goofy in a deep sleep for 1 year. This just leads us to Riku's short story after you finish Sora's, where he's looking to battle the darkness inside of him and somehow ends up in Castle Oblivion as well. To be honest, not a lot happens in this campaign. Vexen uses Riku's data to create the replica and wants to kill the real Riku so that he's no longer the fake, but he ultimately fails and bites the curb. Mickey Mouse comes in to lend some assistance, but very lightly. You see what I did there? Ansem emerges from the darkness of Riku's heart and takes form. Zexion and Lexius are beaten down thanks to Riku using the darkness as his redemption. He's led to nominate by this guy named Diz, who again is not fleshed out until Kingdom Hearts 2, so there's very little development as of this game. And nominate gives Riku the choice of locking his heart so Ansem can escape, or battling him head on. Of course he chooses the latter and disposes of Ansem once and for all after being summoned by Diz. Using the power of both light and darkness, Riku and Mickey set off on their journey to, I don't know, find God or something. And during the credits, there's a new character that's focused on for reasons we're again not clear on yet, and we have to play the next game to find out. Well, that took significantly less time to explain than the first game. I'm amazed at how simple this story was compared to other Kingdom Hearts games, and luckily Chain of Memories isn't as long as Kingdom Hearts 1, so the story's not totally bloated. But there are a few things that made me roll my eyes and think, Jesus Christ, can we just move this along? As I mentioned earlier, until we get close to near the end of Sora's story, we're stuck listening to the same banner between Sora and Riku that we heard in the previous game, only now it's regarding Namine instead of Kairi. It's ear-grating, and I know that this isn't the real Riku, but in the end he just gets beaten by the real Riku and thrown away, never to be seen in any other Kingdom Hearts game, so why was he here? Just to add more conflict than there already was? The Riku replica, in my opinion, just wasn't needed. It feels like unnecessary fluff to make sure there's still some story while Sora retreads through all of the Disney worlds. And speaking of which, the Disney and Final Fantasy stuff is extremely inconsequential in Chain of Memories. There's less character development and the stories are even more abridged than in the first game. How do you do that? The worlds try to compensate for it by making the subject matter about memories, but it just feels so disjointed to what's actually going on in the main narrative. There isn't any voice acting for the Disney and Final Fantasy characters either, which I can understand for the Game Boy Advance version, but in the remake, all of these worlds just feel soulless. There's barely any heart or passion put into any of them, and some of the characters' decisions are downright idiotic. For example, in Agrabah, Aladdin's swarmed by a bunch of Heartless and uses his first wish from the genie to get rid of them. Hang on, I thought the genie couldn't kill anyone. Doesn't matter. Aladdin then sees Jasmine swarmed by another group of Heartless and uses his second wish to save her. And this was after we already proved that Sora is more than capable of dealing with the Heartless. So Aladdin promises to use his last wish to set the genie free, but no joke, only a couple of minutes later he breaks that promise and tries to use his last wish to stop the Heartless again, which he thankfully doesn't get granted this time because Sora tells him to freaking stop and not act like such a moron. The Disney characters aren't the only ones making boneheaded moves though. Once Sora finds out that Namine was a childhood friend and she's being held hostage, he becomes so needlessly bitter towards Donald and Goofy. I understand that the organization are seriously abusing him both physically and mentally, but when he's constantly blowing up at the people who don't deserve it, I don't really want to root for Sora. Yes, Larxene, you're totally right, Sora is so stupid. It's just odd to see this well-developed character take such a drastic turn after one game. I know he's not a bad kid, but some of his actions were not smart at all in this game. That's more than I can say for the organization themselves though. Axel, Larxene, and I guess Marluxia and Vexen are the only ones with any sort of personality. But like I said earlier, we learn next to nothing about them. A lot of the plot points in Chain of Memories are just there to set up Kingdom Hearts 2 rather than being a cohesive story on its own. I think it is interesting overall, but instead of answering questions from the first Kingdom Hearts game, Chain of Memories raises more to tease the players. In the end, it's both important and unimportant to the Kingdom Hearts timeline. You can easily skip this one if you wanted to, but if you're curious about certain details in Kingdom Hearts 2 and don't want to read up about it, then you will have to play this, unfortunately.
So that just leaves the gameplay.
Okay, let's get this over with. Chain of Memories may look exactly like it did in the first game, but now everything, and I mean everything, is determined by cards, from summoning friends for help, casting spells, to even swinging your Keyblade. Throughout the game, you'll gain new cards with different abilities, either by finding them in treasure chests, defeating a boss, or purchasing a set of them in these Moogle shops. You can customize your deck of cards to make fights a little easier for you, and the boss cards you collect can put you at an advantage. But no doubt the best boss card is Genie Jafar, which stops enemies preventing your attacks for 20 card draws. However, each of the cards costs a certain amount of CP, or card points, to have equipped, and you're only allowed to carry so many in your deck, but you can increase this by leveling up. You can't just spam cards willy-nilly in battles though, you have to consider the numerical values of the card you're gonna play and what your enemy's gonna play. If an enemy goes for an attack, you can cancel it and stagger them slightly if you have a card with a higher number, but your opponents can do the same to you. To better your chances, however, you can always try using what are called slights, which are a combination of 3 cards with their numerical values totaled up, making it harder for the enemy to break. By using the right combinations, Sora can perform the same flashy moves he used in the first game, and even some brand new ones if you know where to find them. And if you use a sleight of 3 summoner spell cards, that makes the attack even more powerful, although that doesn't stop Donald from being so inconsiderate with weaknesses. But like regular attacks, enemies and bosses can create sleights too, but you can easily cancel them if you have a 0 card in your deck. No matter how fancy the move is, if you play a 0 card, it stops everything the enemy was trying to do, so be sure to carry a few of them. But be aware that your opponents will also abuse their 0 cards, which is why the fight against Captain Hook is so annoying. As the number of available cards decreases, you can reload them at any time, but the more you do so, the longer it will take for the cards to come back. And if you're using sleights, the first card in that sleight will be gone for the rest of the battle, so you'll need to be careful about that. However, if you have an elixir card, you can replenish every single card you put in your deck almost instantly, including the ones that were lost after building a sleight. I always have one on standby. It makes the battles against regular enemies go by much faster, and I'm not as worried when I'm facing against the bosses. You've got to make sure to keep swapping your Keyblade cards too, because some of them are more powerful than others. When I first played this on the PS3, I kept forgetting to do that and got my ass kicked hard. Chain of Memories can sometimes be excruciatingly difficult, especially when dealing with the organization members, but there's always a right deck of cards and a helpful sleight you can use to do some heavy damage, like the returning Sonic Blade ability, or the disgustingly powerful Lethal Frame sleight exclusive to the remake, which freezes enemies in place and lands several blows on them at once. And when I eventually unlocked the Tornado sleight, Heartless were of no threat anymore, because any of them that got caught in the tornado are dealt with massive damage after it disappears, and any that survive are left stunned. The Trinity Limit sleight is even more game-breaking. You won't get it until the final area, but the combination is very easy to put together and it basically nukes everything in the room. I ended up using this a hell of a lot in conjunction with the Tornado sleight to get some last-minute experience points. What was supposed to be the hardest area in the game has now become my grinding spot. The only time sleights don't work in your favor is during the last boss with Sora, because spamming regular attacks with high numbers does the job fine, and since you're not using sleights, you won't have to worry about losing any cards for the remainder of the fight. This even goes for his third form added to the remake, but it does suck if he manages to scatter your cards everywhere and cast Doom on you, which instantly kills Sora if you don't use the right cards to counter it. I realize this must all sound very confusing and hard to understand, but trust me, it really isn't. There's a tutorial segment at the beginning of the game to help get you going, and you're naturally going to discover more available sleights as you play the game. But to even get a chance at finding one of those sleights, you also have to use your cards to create the next room. You see, after a fight, you'll obtain a non-battle related card with its own properties, and going through doors to progress requires something specific like a green card or one with a higher number than displayed. And depending on which card you use, so say if you want the Heartless in that room to be asleep, you can do that. The worst of these doors definitely have to be the ones where you need to pick a crap load of numbered cards to decrease the counter, and sometimes the total amount can be ridiculously high, so this is where Joker cards come into play that act as any card with any numerical value. These are extremely rare to get though, so use them wisely. Riku's campaign is a little different to Sora's, but you can only access it after finishing the main story. His deck of cards is already set out for him and changes as you play the game, meaning you can't customize the deck yourself and have to deal with what you've got, which are only attack cards, and you can pick up Mickey cards to help you heal and perform holy attacks. However, Riku's also got access to every single boss and enemy card, and on top of that, he also has a few sleights of his own, both of which you can spam to your liking. And as well as that, Riku doesn't even have to recharge his deck of cards when they're all gone. It's just at one tap of a button, but the first card used in a sleight will still be gone. This is the closest you'll get to having a battle system similar to Kingdom Hearts 1, but in case you're worried that Riku's story is harder because of these changes, don't be. When enemies' cards are broken, that gradually fills out this meter, and when it's full, Riku will transform into his darker self where he hits a lot harder and moves much faster. And finally, exclusive to the remake, if the number on your card is exactly the same as the enemy's, Riku will enter duel mode, where when he breaks enough enemy cards, he can unleash a devastating attack that will make most of the bosses a complete joke. The exception to this being the final boss with Ansem, who moves so damn quickly and never stops attacking. Now, Riku's story should only take around 5 to 6 hours to play through, as opposed to Sora's 15 to 20 hours, so the length isn't too much of an issue, but it's still not especially fun. Before we get further into that though, let's take a glimpse at the Game Boy Advance version. Right off the bat, I will give it credit for having some amazing sprite work even to this day, but the rendered cutscenes, while technically impressive for its time, aren't exactly ideal compared to the remake. The gameplay is largely the same though. I'd say it has more appeal than the remake, and the portability would probably make play sessions less monotonous, but since the PS2 version comes with all the HD re-releases, there's no point getting the original Game Boy Advance version anymore. Maybe to complete the collection, but not to understand what happens in the overarching story. The card battle system overall is a very interesting idea and one that can play pretty well, but it also doesn't take very long for Chain of Memories to be so incredibly dull. Partly because of how helpful certain sleights are, and definitely for how samey and lifeless the grid-like worlds are. Minus the boss fights and the story, I was not feeling engaged with anything. The worlds are not fun to travel in the slightest, the gameplay is sorely repetitive, and there will be plenty of times where you'll become so bored that you use cards with no heartless just to get it all over with faster. I also noticed that I completely forgot to talk about 100 Acre Wood and Olympus Coliseum in the last video. In my defense, there's not much to discuss, but it's still worth mentioning. 100 Acre Wood is usually the minigame world in the Kingdom Hearts games, while Olympus Coliseum usually have arena battles. In the case of Chain of Memories, 100 Acre Wood still has brand new minigames, which apparently the Game Boy Advance version never even had, so that kinda makes me wonder what you were actually doing in that version. While Olympus Coliseum just acts as any other world in the game, which like I said earlier, are not entertaining at all. This game drags so quickly, and with the remake it's even worse because it just feels like you're playing a neutered Kingdom Hearts 1. The graphics are about the same as they were in the first game, but you can smell the cheapness from the presentation. Never do that smile again. I already mentioned how none of the worlds have any voice acting, but when there is voice acting, they didn't bother with lip syncing for the English dubbing this time, so they just left the Japanese mouth movements and edited the timing for the English actors, which leads to a lot of weird pauses. Sora's balls also seem to have dropped immediately after Kingdom Hearts 1, and I know Haley Joel Osment got older since then, so it's impossible to fix, but I still find it hilarious. I love the actress who plays Larxene though, it's like I'm watching a female Liquid Snake. She's just having so much fun with it, and her acting's deliciously over the top.
Oh, you're so much fun to watch.
So then, with everything I've just said, I think it's safe to say I didn't particularly like this game.
As I said when talking about the story, even though Chain of Memories feels half-assed and tedious, you need to play it if you want a little more clarity for Kingdom Hearts 2's narrative. I prefer to experience the story itself rather than looking up wikis and reading about it, but I can't deny that this is one of the worst Kingdom Hearts games I've ever played. I know that's a bold statement seeing how we're only 2 games in, and granted I haven't finished 358 Days Over 2 yet and I haven't even touched Coded, but so far from all the ones I played, this is my least favorite in the series. The card system is intriguing, but it asks a lot from the player to go through the same worlds and the same stories we already went through in the first game, on top of having to adjust to a new combat style we weren't expecting. Square changed things too quickly and threw a lot of people off, so proceed with caution and keep in mind that Kingdom Hearts 2 does make everything much better.
That was mainly what helped me soldier on, because I knew that Kingdom Hearts 2 was going to take everything that we loved about the original game and multiply it. Now I've got to get a move on with these Kingdom Hearts reviews if I want to make it to Kingdom Hearts 3, so we'll go through a couple of different games first, then cover Kingdom Hearts 2 in the following video. As for what the next game is, I'm actually going to leave that a bit of a surprise for you all, keep you in suspense. With that said, thank you all for watching this video, and I'll see you guys later. I don't have my hat. First time Square pulls this kind of crap for the Kingdom Hearts franchise. That was a good take. Now I've got to get a move on. Bloody email.
Screw you, email.
And again, it's happened. Thank you all for watching this video, and see you. No. Happens.
See you later.
See you later.
Hey guys.